Did any of the following actually happen as described in these scary stories? Rumble in Humble, Dogman versus Dogman battle in Texas. Dear Scary Stories NYC, this is the craziest thing that happened to me in my life, and the scariest too. I feel like I can't leave out the word surprising as well. It happened one night about 3 weeks ago when I was driving home on Townsend Boulevard. It was in that area on the north end of Humboldt, Texas, which passes through some pretty heavily wooded spots. I know the title of this story announces a heavyweight title bout, but the way the situation started, it was sort of your more typical giant dog-headed monster encounter, if there is such a thing. I was just driving and minding my business, and then this big grayish-colored giant hairy man was coming out of the woods. Have you ever seen a man with a dog's head before? The first time you see one, it sends your brain scrambling to figure out how your eyes could have gotten it so wrong. I mean, you just can't believe what you're seeing. It's so impossible looking. And this one wasn't just impossible looking. He seemed fierce and deadly, like I was about to meet my maker. I instantly went from thinking about my dinner to accepting my doom upon seeing this monster dogman creature, which must have been 9 feet tall or taller. This thing walked right out onto the road, like that was what a giant dog monster was supposed to do. I stopped moving as though I had been frozen from the inside, and I felt cramped with pain. This was the kind of thing that happened in the movies, not in real life. It happened when you were watching Roku at home in your socks. A monster? A monster was something for you to judge and laugh at dismissively. Ha! A monster? That looks so fake. Monsters make us feel safe. They make us feel powerful. In videos and movies, I mean. In real life, as I learned, they can have exactly the opposite effect. That's why I felt sick. It seemed so unfair. This monster was bigger than my car. This monster could reach in and pull me out of my seat as though we were playing Grand Theft Auto. This was like a hairy, dog-headed version of the Hulk. I don't mean it was green. I mean, it was big and nasty, and it couldn't have possibly been there. Even the way it was lit up by my headlights terrified me. It looked so real, like something out of a documentary. And yet, it was a giant werewolf. I had no choice but to hit the brakes and try not to run into it. I knew a crash would wreck my front end, but I'm not sure it would have even hurt the creature at all. While I was slowing the car down and trying to come to a full stop, I was looking at the hulking dogman in front of me. I was experiencing anguish of all sorts, as well as negative physical stress reactions. But this dogman hadn't even noticed me approaching yet. Or maybe that's around when he began to notice the headlights, or maybe the screeching squeal of my tires. As I came to a full stop, I had my eyes shut. I was so afraid to see what was going to happen. I literally didn't. Look, that is. But after the car came to a halt, I hadn't heard a thump, and I hadn't felt one either. Cautiously opening my eyes, I looked out my front windshield, and a huge dog head was baring its fangs and barking at me in a most harsh manner. I sunk down in the driver's seat as low as I could go, crying uncontrollably. I felt as though this was it. This was my final chapter. Some people say that they saw their life pass in front of them when they thought they were going to meet their maker. With me, I heard the song My Way, as sung by Frank Sinatra at first, but it became Elvis before the end. I cried as I got ready to leave this world for whatever comes next. After a while, though, I noticed I was still alive, and I noticed that the dogman wasn't barking at me anymore. I could feel the ground shaking, and I knew something terrible was happening. Curiosity overcoming me, I opened my eyes and looked around in time to see that the great beast was now preoccupied with a very different set of issues entirely. It's a little hard to explain this next part, because it was like turning on a stream of an old horror movie 35 minutes into the film. There wasn't just the one monster anymore, there were two of them. I think they were both the same kind of monster, but they were different colors from each other. I could tell which one was the one that had terrified me already because his fur was grayish. The other one, the new one, had reddish-brownish fur instead, and his ears were different. The gray one had a wolf-like head, but the brown one's head was more dog-like, and the ears were somewhat larger and floppier. It had a wider muzzle than the wolf-like one, and its belly fur was a lighter color too. Both of them were around the same size, I would say. Maybe they were from the same species, but different tribes? The two beasts were already rolling on the highway before I got to see how the fight started. I imagine the brown one must have come along and started it, as the gray one had been harassing me before the fight began. Was I witnessing a turf war between alphas of two different tribes? Or were these two battling for status within their shared tribe? In either case, I was a little too close to ringside for this battle of the century. I put the car in reverse, and I backed up about 30 or 40 feet, keeping the engine idling. I know I should have just backed the heck up and gotten off that road, but as frightened as I was, that's also how amazed I was by what I was seeing. I mean, this fight they were having was absolutely ridiculous. They were leaping over and under each other like some kind of martial arts experts, and yet, when they would attack, it was usually with their immense teeth, snapping away at the softer parts of the other. Never did either one of them stop to come up for air. It was all one continuous motion of dog-on-dog action. They growled and squealed, slammed each other around brutally, and yelped in pain the same way any other kind of canine would. It was a dog fight, to be sure, but it was also as fascinating as any other performance by gifted athletes at the top of their game. The thing is, this wasn't a game, and it was clear that either one of them would be quite happy if they were able to terminate the other one with extreme prejudice. I noticed that they both appeared to have legs more like a dog than like a Bigfoot, which surprised me at the time. They were balancing so much weight on two dog-like feet, and their front legs were quite like arms, hairy, scary monster arms ending in claws. But they didn't seem to use their hands as fists, and they only rarely attacked via the claws. They seemed to use them more for defense, and to set themselves up for making another attack with the teeth, usually for the throat or the soft underbelly region. To call the fight savage would be only the beginning. These two wanted to rip each other to pieces. I've never seen human beings as angry as those two big dogmen on that night in my headlights. So I had my fill of things when it started to get bloody. I realized that would be me next, and I turned around, looking to drive in reverse for a few hundred feet. I wanted a wide berth between me and those two creatures before I tried making a U-turn over the grass partitions to drive away. But seconds after I began this maneuver, one of the dogs let out a blood-curdling yelp, so loud that it hurt my ears. It was the brown one, and he had fear in his eyes as he raced away from the gray one, his tongue flapping in the breeze, running directly toward my car as the beast leaped onto my hood and then onto the roof and down the back. I opened my eyes, and there was the gray one, looking furious, racing on two legs directly toward my face. I screamed and that dogman leaped onto my car hood so hard that I bounced up and banged my head on the car roof. The dogman bounced me 2 more times before running over my car and chasing the brown dogman. As I watched, the brown one and the gray one both dropped to all fours and kept chasing each other. I was so stunned that it took me a few seconds to realize that this was my chance to get out of there. I put the car in drive, and drive is what I did. That was the end of the story for me. It's not like I was going to chase them and find out who won. The winner was me as far as I was concerned, because I was fine and my car could at least still drive. I have to say, I had to stop the car after a few miles and pull over to the side to be sick, but if that's the worst thing that happened because of this incident, I don't feel as though I have a right to complain. Of course, my worldview has been battered and rearranged. I never took stories of monsters seriously before. If the things I saw hadn't been so unforgivingly savage, and if it weren't so absolutely clear that they could have crushed me in a second, I don't think I'd take monsters seriously even still. This was not like Harry and the Hendersons. This was not a friendly woodland pal coming for a fun visit. This was hunger, and anger, and savagery, and death, all wrapped up in a lot of muscle and hair. And then, before you can even accept that he's real, he gets into a fight with another hairy monster dogman. I mean, I might be crazy. I might not have really seen what I think I saw. If it was a dream or a hallucination, though, it was more real than any other dream I've ever had. Although the highway was very empty that night, I'm wondering if any other drivers caught sight of the rumble in Humble. Dogman versus Dogman. Battle in Texas. Kathy Barrickman, executive producer, couldn't be cooler and couldn't be looser. We think she's great, and it's simple math. She's number 1, our EP Kath. Please join us in thanking our executive producer, Kathy Barrickman, for making this show possible. If you would like to become a Scary Stories executive producer like the inimitable Kathy Barrickman, and also get to watch our secret uncensored stories every Sunday night, just join our paid subscribers club at peterbernard.com, or click the join link under this or any of our videos. PQ Ribber will have more info at the end of this episode, but right now, it's time for our second scary dogman story of the day. This one took place right near the Chestnut Ridge, and we call it The Werewolf of Wolf Run, West Virginia. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I've seen the werewolf of Wolf Run, West Virginia. My sister saw it when we were kids, and I was jealous of her for years. She wasn't even interested in monsters as I've always been, so it seemed unfair that she would get to see this real-life werewolf. Actually, it was most likely a dogman, as it was not wearing a stitch of clothing, either when my sister saw it 25 years ago, or when I saw it at the end of last year. Wolf Run is a tiny place in West Virginia, and my family never actually lived there. My sister was friends with a girl who went to the Baptist church over there, and sometimes my sister would go to church there with her friend. It was in the cemetery behind that church that she said she saw the dogman, or the werewolf, of Wolf Run. What I mean to say is that she and her friend were in the cemetery looking at the grave markers, and they saw the dogman watching them from the woods. It was scary, but they didn't run because the monster never left the wood line, and he was hundreds of feet away. So instead, they just stared back at it. According to my sister, the creature stood taller than our father, and he was 6 foot 2. It had light-colored fur that failed to camouflage it under the dark tree cover. In fact, it made the creature easier to spot from a distance. It was not an albino, and the fur wasn't white, but it was a light brown sort of a shade, and the hair was very short all over. It had a big head and looked a lot like Scooby-Doo with giant tusk-like fangs. It stood on its hind legs and seemed to be holding onto a tree. She never saw it walk, so she wasn't certain that it could, on its hind legs, I mean. It might have walked on four legs and then propped itself up against the tree, but its body looked so human to her standing there like that both girls described it as a werewolf. They didn't act like they were lying, and they didn't tell anyone but family and close friends. I never doubted that she was telling the truth, and both girls had matching stories. It was many, many years afterward when I was driving through Wolf Run late one night. I have dreamed about this so many times since it happened, and my dream version takes place on Zion Drive with the church and cemetery within my view. In actuality, though, this event happened on the next road over, Route 50/1. As I was driving down the road in the darkness, something huge came barreling out of the woods on the hill heading up to the church and the graveyard. I double freaked, yelling and turning my wheel and accidentally stomping on the gas instead of the brake. Wait, I guess that would be a triple freak, come to think of it. It seems a little funny in retrospect, but I thought it was a zombie coming to get me from the cemetery. That's a weird thing to think when something runs out in front of your car, but that is what I thought, and man, was I absolutely terrified about it. In the next few seconds, I found the brake, slammed on it, and found myself going into a mad spin-out. I mean, I was spinning over and over and over again while still generally moving forward and toward the thing that wasn't a zombie. Briefly, over and over, I saw the thing there, and I noticed that it was much larger than any zombie in any movie or TV show that I'd ever seen, and a lot hairier, too. I could see that it was a giant wolf, very darkly colored, but shining in the moonlight, and I could see that I was about to hit into his front legs with the side of my out-of-control vehicle. At the last second, the big dog did something I hadn't expected. He stood up. He stood upright, lifting those two front legs up off the ground and out of my way. I was momentarily elated that I was not going to be crashing into a giant wolf, but in the next second, the car skidded into a deep, wet puddle, and the engine conked out. I had been shaken up a little, but when I looked out of the window of the car, and I saw the wolf thing walking toward me on his hind legs, I woke up pretty quickly, and I started to get to work on restarting the engine. It did not start on the first try, and I got to listen to the sound of dog nails on the asphalt walking over to me. I did not stare, I did not even look, but I saw in my side vision that the Dogman had no trouble at all walking upright like that. He seemed quite at home, in fact. I was already tearing up as the engine started, and the Dogman leaned over to look in the driver's side window at me curiously. It even tilted its head sideways in that cute way that dogs do. I was not saying "aw" at that moment, though. Putting the car in drive and hitting the gas only produced a flying stream of mud and water flying out behind the car. That was a deep puddle, and the sound I had just generated with these actions had set the Dogman off. It barked at me loudly, or more properly, it seemed to be barking at the car. I think it was offended by the screaming engine and the stream of muddy water, and who can blame the beast? I threw it in reverse, and the Dogman actually leaped backward in surprise. I don't know what surprised it. I suppose just that the car moved at all. I was out of the puddle, but still had to maneuver back onto the highway, which was not easy to do. I had the Dogman barking at me and snapping at the car. For the most part, he seemed as scared of my car as I was of him, but every time he barked, I jumped. Every time he snapped at me with his teeth, I felt myself lose a year of my life from the intense fear. I knew intellectually that the dog was probably not going to be able to break in and hurt me, but he was still banging on the car and barking and growling and flashing his fangs, and I was quite literally shaking all over. Even after I maneuvered around it and floored the engine, the big dog chased me. It ran on 2 legs at first, then dropped to all 4s. Mostly, it stayed about a car length behind, but when I upped it over 60, the thing actually pulled up beside my window, barking at me. I couldn't believe any kind of animal could run 60 miles an hour, and even this one couldn't do it for long. It eventually fell back, and I've never seen it again. Obviously, because of the coloring, it could not have been the same animal my sister saw a quarter of a century ago. But it was the same kind of animal, of that I feel certain. And the name by which my family calls that monster is the werewolf of Wolf Run, West Virginia.
Thanks for watching till the end. If you liked what you saw, please consider clicking like on the video or sharing it. You can become a channel member by clicking the join link below. Then you can check our community page to find the links to 10 hours or more of secret, uncensored Dogman stories too wild to be told on this channel. Your other option is to join our paid subscribers club at peterbernard.com. That's Peter's homemade club, where he will personally email you the links as well as occasional secret club messages. You may also be included as an executive producer in a future episode. You have a scary experience you want to tell us about? You can email us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com, or else call our Scary Stories voicemail hotline at 804-LESS-SCARY. The machine cuts off every few minutes, so if you have a long story, please keep calling back and we'll piece it together later on. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
Come back for more scary stories.